This is Simple Scrum with me, Paul Lister. Scrum is an agile framework helping you to mitigate risk and change direction when you need to. The purpose of Scrum is to build a small piece of usable value called the increment. Scrum keeps it small by only allowing you to build it in a small amount of time, called the sprint. With a group of people who have all the skills to build the increment, the Scrum team. Let's look at what needs to happen before the team's first sprint. The product owner, the Scrum team's owner of value, will talk to the stakeholders about what they need. This will lead to the product owner writing the product goal, a description of the overall future state of the product when it is completed. From the product goal, an ordered list of independent pieces of value are created. These are product backlog items, and this is the product backlog. The team then look at the items most likely to come into sprint. They try to reduce the size of them in terms of effort and understand how long they would take. This is known as refinement. A Scrum team is normally fewer than 10 people, and the roles in the Scrum team are called the accountabilities. Let's take a look at them. The first accountability is the product owner. They own the product goal and the product backlog that comes from it. They want to maximize the value coming from a sprint. The second accountability are the developers, the group of people in the team responsible for building an increment of value which satisfies the definition of done. And lastly, the Scrum Master, accountable for making sure that the team does Scrum as per the Scrum Guide and helping the team to be effective. Scrum theory. Scrum theory is based on empiricism, that is, making decisions based on experience. Scrum theory has 3 pillars, the first of which is transparency, being open and visible about how you are doing the work and what the value is. The second pillar is inspection. If you have good transparency, then you can examine how you did the work and look at how well the value satisfied the stakeholder. The final pillar is adaptation. After inspecting, you may decide that you change the next piece of value, or you adapt the way you work for the next sprint. These 3 pillars are intrinsic to all Scrum events and the framework itself. There are 5 events in Scrum, 1 containing event and 4 formal events. Let's take a look at them. The containing event is the sprint. It is less than a month, has the same duration every single time, and sprints follow one after another. The first event in the sprint is sprint planning. Teams understand where they are with the product goal, what they're going to build in this sprint, and how they're going to do it. That's known as the sprint backlog, a real-time visible plan of the work to be done. Every day in the sprint, the team meets up to check whether they're still on target with regards to their sprint goal and change their plan if not. This is the daily Scrum. Toward the end of the sprint is the sprint review. This is where the Scrum team and stakeholders interact to examine increments that have met the definition of done. And finally, there is the retrospective, where the Scrum team examines how it worked in the previous sprint and decides if it wants to make any changes for the next sprint. The sprint is the very core of Scrum, the heartbeat that enables agility. It is called a containing event because it contains all the other 4 formal Scrum events. In order to reduce complexity, sprints are a month or less in duration. And to further reduce complexity and to aid predictability, sprints are consecutive. There are no gaps between sprints. Furthermore, sprints are of a set duration. Once the length is set, it doesn't change. The length of a sprint is determined by two factors. It is the amount of time that a team can consistently produce increments. But also, twinned with this, it is the amount of time that they can get feedback from stakeholders on those increments. We're going to look at the commitments, the promises you keep in Scrum, and the artifacts, the things you build to honour those promises. The first commitment is the product goal, a description of the future state of the product. From this, the first artifact, the product backlog, is constructed, a series of pieces of value which will build towards that future state. It is an ordered, emergent list. In sprint planning, a sprint goal is decided, a description of the value to be constructed in the sprint. The sprint goal is also part of its own artifact, the sprint backlog, which consists of the sprint goal, items selected from the product backlog to satisfy that sprint goal, and a plan of how to build them over the sprint. The final commitment is the definition of done. This is a list of quality gates that, when a product backlog item reaches, becomes an increment, or a series of product backlog items. And the increment is the artifact attached to the definition of done, the actual piece of deliverable value that is going to the stakeholders. At the start of the sprint, the first event, sprint planning, is undertaken. It has three parts: the why, the what, and the how. In the why, the product owner, after discussions with stakeholders and comments in the sprint review, will discuss what needs to be built next in order to further the product goal. Based on this discussion, the teams will formulate a sprint goal, a description of the value that is going to be delivered in the sprint. Now we come to the what part of sprint planning, and the developers, and only the developers, will select product backlog items which can be built into increments which will satisfy the sprint goal. Finally, in the how section of sprint planning, the developers create a plan of how they're going to build these increments. The output of sprint planning is the sprint backlog, the combination of the sprint goal, the items selected from the product backlog, the plan of how to build them into increments. This is a real-time visual picture of the work. Today we're looking at the daily Scrum, the communications checkpoint in the working part of the sprint. The daily Scrum is a short meeting. Its time box is 15 minutes and is only for the developers within the Scrum team. The purpose of the meeting is to look at the plan that they made in sprint planning to assess whether or not they are still going to complete their sprint goal. If they are, then the plan is still viable for that day's work. If not, the team may have to get together and discuss how they can make different increments but still satisfy the sprint goal, as this does not change within the daily Scrum. The daily Scrum may also highlight any impediments that are stopping the developers from completing the increments. They may want to talk to the Scrum Master after the event. Today we're looking at the sprint review, the event in Scrum where the value is checked by the stakeholders. The sprint review begins with the product owner explaining what the sprint goal was and how it furthers the product goal. The developers will then interact with the stakeholders. They will show them the increments that have passed the definition of done, or more usefully, the stakeholders will utilise those increments in order to understand whether or not they are fit for purpose, giving the team feedback along the way. Finally, the team and the stakeholders will discuss what steps to take next. What is the next stages of the furtherance of the product goal? As a result of feedback and comments within the sprint review, the product backlog may change, and information may be taken into the next sprint planning. Today we are going to look at the retrospective, the Scrum event where the team gets to examine the assumptions that they made at the start of the sprint and whether or not they want to do things differently next sprint. For a 1-month sprint, the retrospective is time boxed to 3 hours. It is for the team and only the Scrum team, a safe space for them to discuss how they worked in the previous sprint. The event may be facilitated by the Scrum Master, as they have a vested interest in the work process. The team will examine any empirical objective data they have, metrics, KPIs, and anything else that is hard data. They will also collect subjective data, the team's opinions, thoughts, and memories on the previous sprint. Possibly facilitated by the Scrum Master, the team will then analyse these sets of data to see if they can get insights into how they worked. Inspecting these insights may lead the team to formulate actions and experiments that they want to try in the next sprint, and may be part of sprint planning. A great way to learn more about Scrum is to do the Scrum Alliance's Certified Scrum Master certification. For courses, go to agilekeys.co.uk.